Hey, what's up guys? Quarantine has been pretty dry, I'm not gonna lie, and I haven't been feeling too motivated to work on any of my projects recently. So here's a fail-safe video where I can talk for hours about one of my favorite topics, camera gear. This week I'm going to be talking about my first 6 months with my camera, the Canon EOS R. I'm going to be talking about my experience and just some thoughts of using this camera. I got this camera 6 months ago when I was upgrading from my Canon 6D and my Canon M5. This was supposed to be the all-in-one camera that I would be using for photo and video. Overall, I'm pretty happy just using it. However, I did find some quirks with the camera that I had to get used to over the first month of using it. Now, new with the launch of this camera is the lack of a mode dial within the camera. So now that there isn't a mode dial, you have a mode button where you use the rear dial to change your modes. Along with this, the video function is split into a different mode menu. So after clicking the mode button, then you have to press info, which will show another menu for your video shooting modes. Now, I do miss having a dedicated switch to go into video. However, there's a dedicated record button which will have you start recording with whatever settings you have for custom video function number 3. However, I do wish that you could change that to a different video shooting mode, such as shooting in manual or in automatic, or custom video shooting mode 1 or 2. Now, the size is very similar to a Canon 6D, maybe a little bit smaller and lighter, but generally I use this camera with the EF adapter, where I'm going to be using primarily Canon's older DSLR lenses, which makes the camera body with the adapter essentially the same size and weight as the Canon 6D. But if you're coming from something like the Canon 5D series cameras, then you'll definitely notice a difference for the body being smaller and lighter in the hand. Now, a couple of reasons I really like this camera and why I'm still sticking with Canon is the flip screen to use for YouTube videos like I am right now, where I'm shooting, where I can monitor myself, the autofocus and the framing of my shot, the build quality of the camera body, and just overall feel in the hand. And as well, I just really like the feel of the Canon lenses. Now, I don't really shoot super slow motion video or use 4K that much, just for the sake of having to deal with bigger files and my computer not being able to handle it. So I primarily just shoot in 1080p. Sometimes I do a little bit of slow-mo in 1080 60p. In terms of the video features, most of those don't matter to me that much, just really the autofocus for on-the-go shooting. I hear that the dynamic range for this camera is not supposed to be the best compared to other cameras within the same price bracket. However, moving from a Canon 6D and comparing it with the files that I'm getting out of this camera, I still find that I'm getting pretty good results. Also, my shooting style doesn't really ever have me wanting to bump up my shadows to an extreme extent or crush my highlights and I don't really shoot in harsh or contrasty lighting situations, so I don't care too much about that. I'm not super nit. Overall, the performance is pretty good. Now, when the camera came out, it came out with the new touch bar feature, which is still crap. I can still say after all the firmwares they have, it does not work very well. So I just assigned it to a custom function button that I use to rate my photos. If I want to pick my photos while I'm shooting or after a shoot, I mean, hey, it's still 2 customizable buttons. I do really enjoy the 30 megapixels, giving you the ability to crop in and recompose in post. However, I don't really use all 30 megapixels. It's kind of extraneous for what I'm shooting most of the time and the output files that I'm going to be getting. But I do think that it's nice to have the option there if I ever do want to do a larger scale print. And one thing to note is that the 30 megapixel raw files do take up more space on your SD card, and when you're bringing that over to your computer for storage, it also does take up more space, so that's just something to keep in mind. I got this camera before the big discounts. Originally when this camera came out, it was $3,000 Canadian, and now I think they're going for $2,400 for the body alone. And the discounts were in part due to a certain 2 cameras coming out, the Canon R5 and the Canon R6. Now more than ever, I feel like this camera has a good value for what you're paying for, and I think it's generally a pretty good deal. When I got my body 6 months ago, I got it off of Kijiji for $2,200, and purchasing it from a classifieds ad, I didn't have to pay for tax and worry about all of that stuff. I do wish that there was inbuilt image stabilization in the camera body, just to have that additional stabilization for video, or when you're using lenses that don't have image stabilization, such as some nice fast prime lenses. But for now, I guess the digital stabilization will do. It's definitely better to have the digital stabilization than to not have any stabilization for your video footage. And generally, I find that it works okay. Now, I am really excited for Canon to release some of their constant f4 zooms on the RF mount. Currently, I have the Canon 17-40, the Canon 70-200, and the Canon 24-70 2.8. Currently, most of the RF lenses they have out now are fast, heavy professional lenses. However, I do like to keep my kit as light as possible, so when I go traveling, it's just easier to bring everything around. And I got this camera after the 1.4 firmware update, which updated the eye autofocus to make it a lot better than what it really was when the camera first came out. People were actually comparing the eye autofocus to Sony's eye autofocus. And in my experience, when shooting portraits, I found that the eye autofocus worked really well and did a great job tracking my subject. And just coming over from the Canon 6D, since the 6D didn't have a joystick, I was never really used to that anyways. And I know a lot of people gripe about this camera not having a joystick to move your autofocus points around when you're shooting. I found that to be more of a non-issue because you can still use the directional pad on the back to move your autofocus points or use the touchscreen as well. On my older Canon M5, I used to actually use the rear of the touchscreen to move my autofocus points because it was closer to my thumb and I didn't have to move my thumb around that much. However, with the bigger body on the EOS R, I didn't find myself doing that as much, more so relying on the directional pad to move my autofocus points. Anyways, that's it for this week's video, guys. If you guys liked the video, feel free to give me a thumbs up down below. If you guys are interested in more videos similar to this or talking about photography or video, feel free to hit the subscribe button. You'll be notified whenever I come out with a new video. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I will see you guys in next week's video. Bye.